first nurse who ever went on TED.
Largest profession in all of healthcare, often the decision makers do not include nursing. So to say, we deal with all of the end users and all of the end product, but nobody designs product that works well for us. So nurses on average do 28 workarounds a shift, are in 36 different places an hour. They're innovating in highly inefficient environments, but it is burning out this workforce at huge levels.
Rebecca, I saw your TED talk, completely moved. All of those who are watching this or are live, please go and watch Rebecca's TED talk. It's very, very moving. So Rebecca was a nurse. And there are nurses who will do their job and the nurses who will take care of their patients and they love their job. So Rebecca is the one who take care of their patients very well. And it became her passion. She was not a normal nurse. She was the first nurse who ever went on TED. And now she talks on, she was featured on Fortune companies and on Forbes as well, ABC News, a lot of media channels. And she started a non-profit organization, which is helping nurses become entrepreneurs, helping nurses in growing their business. And this non-profit organization also got the validation of United Nations in a very short span of time. So I want to ask Rebecca, how did you manage to get eyeballs of UN in such a small sort of period of time? So this is incredible marketing. And I know marketing and sales is the oxygen of any business. And how were you able to do this fantastic mass marketing for your nonprofit that you were recognized by UN so fast?
So thank you, one, for having me, and two, Rachna, I think it's along what Rachna also said, is when you follow your passion, things happen. And for us, I think healthcare has always been a major topic in the United States, around the world, but in the United States, the topic never really included nurses at a global scale. Although we're the largest profession in all of healthcare, often the decision makers do not include nursing. So my experience, to your point, was I had started a company back in 2013. Hackathon changed my life. I'm sure you guys know, in this space. That is what then led me to the TED Talk, which really elevated the voice of nursing to be heard, to say, we deal with all of the end users and all of the end product, but nobody designs product that works well for us. So nurses on average do 28 workarounds a shift, are in 36 different places an hour. They're innovating in highly inefficient environments, but it is burning out this workforce at huge levels. And if you gave nurses the chance to innovate, they could potentially solve the primary problems that they're seeing at the bedside and change the face of healthcare and human health with it and stabilize our profession. So how did we get the UN to recognize us? We just started talking on social. To me, LinkedIn has been one of the greatest platforms to amplify and elevate voices that would otherwise never be heard or seen, to engage with those who have the power to influence those who make the decisions. So one thing that I would say, if you're asking how you do this, I think the truth is nobody likes to be sold to. So if you're going to try to sell something to someone, nobody is going to respond. But if you provide them with education and insight and direction, the truth is they are going to learn to trust you and invest in you and see you in ways that you will never, ever accomplish if you try to sell someone. So what we did is we educated. We came out and said, here is the situation in nursing. We have over 5 million nurses in the United States. We have 19 million nurses in the world. But the truth is that we are burning them out at rates that do not sustain this profession. So as we began to educate, and we started to run hackathons. In fact, Rachna, our biggest partners were Microsoft and J&J, was the ones who sponsored. Johnson & Johnson in New Jersey hosted our first hackathon for nurses in physical presence in New Jersey in 2019. And we began to elevate this voice. Suddenly, everyone turned to us to start to validate at the United Nations, to work with countries who started to recognize that nursing workforces were going to be central to their support for their healthcare systems in the future, started to ask us, how can we stabilize those ones? The UN, we became an affiliate member through Congo, which allows us to meet with and help countries who are trying to build and stabilize their nursing workforce in those kind of capacities. So what I would just say to you is that it's not about sales, it's about aligning people around a mission that they want to be involved in. And as soon as you do that, as soon as you start using your voice to provide good and insights and value, people are going to trust you and invite you in. And for me, what is slightly different is I've started some for-profit companies, exited those, but also starting nonprofits allowed you to reach people differently, because it allows you to be trusted, because you're not doing it for the sake of yourself, you're doing it for the sake of a cause. And when you try to change the world for the betterment of the world, people are attracted to that kind of energy. And so that's what I would say for a lot of people out there. Start volunteering, start showing up at organizations that are making a difference, and your whole world will change when you start paying out that positive energy.
Superb, superb. With so much knowledge and wisdom, Rebecca, I'm sure you have some mentors and wisdoms and coaches. So who's the biggest mentor and coach
in my life? I would say there was one individual, his name was, there was two actually. So Chris Ford, he is now the founder of American Renal Dialysis Clinics. He started and supported me in my first company through Northeastern. That's one of the largest dialysis centers in the world. And he saw something in me from a very early time to invest in me, to say, your ideas around nurse innovation helped me establish the first nurse innovation program at Northeastern University in the country. And his backing allowed for that program to found that first initiative in the United States. The next, I can honestly say, was Linda Benton at Johnson & Johnson. Linda Benton is the head of global affairs for nursing in the world. And what happened is when we started to talk about nurse innovation, Johnson & Johnson, we ran our first hackathon for nurses in the world in 2016. We received a phone call from J&J in 2017 in which they invited us to fly to their headquarters. And over 15 years, they had run a campaign. They had always invested in nursing, recognizing value nursing had in healthcare. And they had run a campaign for 15 years of thanking nurses for being nurses. And they recognized that that campaign was failing. We were losing more nurses than ever at the bedside, and just thanking a nurse felt like empty platitudes to a profession who was so worth so much more. So after experiencing our hackathons, Johnson & Johnson pivoted their 15-year campaign of thanking nurses to the future of nurse innovation as the central point of their healthcare mantra going forward. And if it hadn't been for Linda in the last 6 years, the David and the Goliath story probably would never have happened, and it has elevated nurses to an international platform to drive that forward. So two, the first to believe in you when you were a founding healthcare startup person, which I was, to the person then that elevated the entire initiative Nurse Innovation to a global audience who otherwise would never have heard it.
Excellent. This is brilliant. Thank you so much. If you're going to follow your passion, you're going to see the way very, very clearly. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for being a fabulous nurse and also helping nurses and helping in the healthcare space. Thank you very much. And the one person leaves. Yep. I'm divorced with this startup with this guy now. So tell us about this, Rebecca.
I coach a lot of startups. Same thing too, Prakash. Everything is always rosy at the beginning. I'm sure Jonathan and Rachna can tell you the same. People get very excited. It's when the rubber starts to hit the road and things start to get difficult. And when money becomes involved, things get infinitely more complicated. And I think why I'm nodding to the team is absolutely critical. And so the truth is, to your point, putting a whole bunch of people together that have only known each other for 3 or 6 months is usually a recipe for disaster. And where I've always found the best entrepreneurs, right, are those who have experienced the problem firsthand and have developed a solution to come out of it, and you build the team around them. There's been in the last few years, I don't know if you know this, in the United States, in 2019, there were 9,000 health tech companies. By the end of 2022, there were 16,000. Now, we saw 475 billion pumped into the healthcare industry in the United States during that time. And a lot of people, I would show up at the biggest healthcare conferences in the world, HLTH, Vive. These are very fancy conferences in the United States around healthcare. And I would walk around and meet all of these people who had started companies, raised millions, and I could not figure out what was the problem they were solving. And I don't know about all of you who are on this call, but the biggest failure next to having a failing team is, what is the problem you are solving? And that to me has always been the disconnect when you drill down. The best investors know if you cannot clearly articulate the problem and the solution and actually validate that this is a problem for the industry at the micro level, because the truth is a lot of people are like, oh, I'm going to solve congestive heart failure. Here's the entire TAM on the return on investment of that scope. And you're like, well, that's actually not a solution that's going to be adopted, because you're creating simply more work for the front line as opposed to actually treating the root problem. The reality is it doesn't work out. So I'm nodding because finding your founders is going to be a critical spot, but also being aware that sometimes working with an organization, I'm guessing like Prakash and Rachna, where they're going to bring in other people who have the skill sets that they see are going to be necessary to be able to scale this from 3 to 5 years, is going to be critical. And we see this happen.
It's difficult to divorce as well.
So I think that Prakash gave excellent advice. If your revenues are going the right direction, your founder, your board is going to be fine with you. And so when they start getting involved is when they're not believing that you are managing the direction correctly. Am I on mute? Let me see. I don't think so. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Good. Yeah.
So I think the reality is, what I would also say to startups, and this may be contra to where this is to try to run as long as you can without taking investor money until you have sales, if you can. And the reason being, and I think the market's changing this way, in all honesty. I think prior to this, there was a lot of money out there to be given. And I think now the market's changing and you're going to have to show a track record, either being a very successful entrepreneur who's built something before, or you could be like Jonathan, who comes out of a space like X and the Moonshot Factory, that people are going to give you the value that you deserve for your organization. The truth is I think a lot of earlier stage investors right now are going to want to see that you've sold something before they're going to invest in you. Because if you can have one sale and they can see the value of that, you're going to be able to prove it. And there's a whole bunch of companies out there that are like, well, we're pre-revenue and we need to make heavy investments into technology. And what I'm going to say to you is you just need an MVP. And the truth is, even the best tech companies in the world today, much of what they do is still manual, right? If you're Google and Microsoft, you're not manual, right? But the truth is, the vast majority of every tech company I still speak with, when I pull back the levers, there is so much human capital to make that engine go. Now, this might all change with the invention of AI. And suddenly I was talking to one of the gentlemen over at Microsoft last night at an event that MIT was sort of involved with last night. And they said at Microsoft, 30% of the coding is being done by humans. 70% of their coding is now being done by AI. The world is about to change dramatically. So what I would say to you is that healthcare tech also may come down dramatically if they know that there's not human capital behind it, because they recognize you've broken the code on AI. So the suggestion that I would have for you is don't invest in the resources to build this tech until you've been able to prove that somebody's willing to buy it. And then you hustle hard to make it happen. And then when you have that sale, you go to the investors because you've proven there's a revenue stream, and that is worth gold in today's market. But I'll turn it over to Rachna and Jonathan, because I think they're closer to this than I am. And at my own company, they specifically, as we scaled to a company that got a $1.2 billion valuation in the last year, the reality is they hired a CEO and a president. The CEO managed the board, the president managed the day-to-day operations. So if you can get to that point, bravo. But we do know the demands are there, and eventually it will take more than one person to manage this.
What is Rebecca's take on IP? So she's been mentoring and educating so many nurses start their venture, and she does so much of innovation for nurses. What's your take on IP, Rebecca?
Yeah, so when I started my first company, my father's an attorney, and he said, you're never going to have the money to defend on this, so focus on getting the product up and launched, and then the rest will happen. Jonathan, you're in a very different space. It was the best advice that I ever got. We sold the company before we had to deal with issues of IP. So what I can tell you, though, is what we were having this debate last night, is we realized policy and regulation is often the death of innovation, right? And so the challenge that you have is those who currently sit in the FDA or all these regulation bodies, they were educated 30, 50 years ago in a school of mindset that governs their way of thinking, still is very much in their way of thinking today. Now, there's a group of us that are growing in this space that are causing influence, discussing new discussions, and the world is changing. But I was recently at a meeting about policies and getting those to run for office. And some of the congressmen said, look, we all believe that change happens quickly. But the truth is, change in Congress in the United States that's considered fast takes 10 years. But the average change takes 40 or 60 years. And I think we have to understand that in the situation of regulations, it is going to take 40 to 60 years. Generational changes are going to have to happen to try to break through these things. During COVID, we saw the most rapid times of healthcare innovation ever to take root because everything was laxed. All the regulations were laxed across scale. And we finally saw changes happen rapidly in healthcare over the course of 2 or 3 years that would have previously taken 10, 12 years. The average length of an investor now investing in healthcare, they used to think it would be 5 years, similar to their return on investment from fintech. The reality is it went to 7 years. Now they're looking at 12 to 20 years on that return on investment. That is why healthcare is so risky, because the regulations that play in this space are substantially more complicated than almost any other vertical. So what I would say to you, again, early stage, you're going to be spending good money after what I consider is a bad investment in early stages, unless you're doing something like what Jonathan is doing and you've spun out of that. My suggestion is use that money because you have a long game here. And the people that are going to win are those who don't run out of money. Otherwise, you're going to be exactly where Jonathan, you can either be the acquirer or the acquired. And the truth is you want to be that person that is driving those ultimate decisions. And it's going to be hard and painful, but you got to be prepared. Nothing happens fast. And you have to be in there for 5, 10, 15 years. And I think we all have been sold ideas that it happens much faster. And there are a couple exceptions that inspire all of us, but true success is going to come over time, not usually